Wrath of Angels. Chapter 1, Scene 1, Discovery. On the edge of the ruin storm. Month 3, year 256, the 41st millennium. The first voices came over Vox in bursts of static. The boarding team were ghosts in the dark, their words stumbling through interference thick as tar. Dead everywhere, markings. Calibanite, but old. Emperor's mercy, this is a tomb. Every syllable was dragged through a storm. They spoke of corridors lined with corpses, armour split and blackened, banners from another age hanging in tatters. They gave serial numbers scraped from scorched plating, numbers the Auspex confirmed against archives older than most ships alive today. Their commander's voice rasped, tight, unnerved, confirming. These sigils are First Legion, but from the Heresy era. They fanned out in pairs, looms hooded, bolts held low. Merritt grumbled that his knee ached as if the deck had teeth. Denor tried to mutter a joke about hazard pay, then swallowed it when his helm picked up the smell. Sweet, copper, old. The rookie, Varro, clicked his tongue on the Vox when he was frightened, a tick that earned a quiet "cut it" from the sergeant. Their Auspex man, Scythe, swore softly. The Hulk's internal map kept folding, stairwells looping back on themselves like bad scripture. On the command bridge of the derelict, they found bodies, mortals at their stations, and one Astartes in ivory plate felled at close range. The angles of fire told a story that made no sense. Bolt impacts from friendly calibers, blades cutting across defensive lines as if allies had turned their weapons inward. A gaunt cherub servitor hung from the rafters by a tangle of ruptured cabling, wings charred to wire. One trooper whispered, "This wasn't the Night Lords. This was us." Another muttered, "Why would they kill their own?" The question lay like a blade on the deck, and no one dared pick it up. They moved past the bridge into an officer's gallery. A long table was laid with cracked goblets and a single petrified orange, knife still buried to the hilt beside it. A picture of the lions stared down from a soot-blackened frame, glass crazed like spiderweb. "Document and move," the sergeant said, but his voice had gone paper-thin. The Vox feed captured fragments of their confusion. Merritt kept testing his knee as he scanned corpses, cursing the old wound from Thramus that always sang when a fight was coming. Denor breathed too loud on open mic. Sith told him to choke it back, or the echoes would use it. Varro tried to joke about hazard pay again, this time about back pay for ghosts, and then his words cut short as he realized the blood trails curved back into friendly lines. "Tracks fold in," he said, shaky, like they chased each other in circles. No one answered. They didn't have to. The circles were right there, dried brown on steel. They crossed a shrine where the votive candles had burned low enough to puddle and harden in stalagmites. A prayer scroll had fused to the floor, letters bubbled into unreadable blisters. "Heresy," Denor said, and didn't sound convinced by his own voice. "Entropy," Sith corrected, which sounded worse. They found a locker room where someone had been shaving when the alarms went. The razor lay rusted to the basin, a face print still visible in dust on the mirror. Varro, who was young enough to still be shocked by the intimacy of dead strangers, lifted a hand to the glass and stopped himself just shy of touching. The glass breathed, fogged from the inside, cleared. "Sarge," he whispered. "Sarge, the mirror." The machine spirit screamed. Vox howled like tearing steel. Helm screens flared white. Lumen strips popped in a chain. A hot wind rushed through dead corridors as if the ship took a long breath. Static rose to a pitch that made teeth ache. The channel cut. To those listening aboard Serad's ship, there was only a crackle, then nothing. The team were gone, swallowed mid-sentence. Additional fire teams sent to locate them reported only echoing corridors and fresh trails that seemed to double back on themselves. One swore he heard his own boots following him, a half-second out of step. Another described his visor fogging from inside despite full seal. On an engineering deck, someone had written "fracture" in oil across a bulkhead and then dragged a gauntlet through it, smearing the word into a set of ribs. Reports cut to static, then silence. The derelict closed its jaws tighter with every step. Serad called his inner council to the strategium. The chamber was lit only by guttering lumen strips, shadows carving the faces of his lieutenants into masks. The hollow at the center threw up a skeletal image of the Hulk and its ragged orbit. Ghost arcs, ghost echoes, paths that refused to settle. Veteran Officer Darnath spoke first, voice steady but eyes rimmed with fatigue. "We should burn it now? Torpedoes and silence before it poisons us further." Navigator Kale argued the opposite, clutching his data slate like a relic. "Azrael's command is clear. We hold. To disobey is heresy." A younger Lieutenant Varun swore he heard his own name whispered in the static and begged to abandon the Hulk. Master-at-Arms Halver, a man with a broken nose and a rosary of empty bolt casings, suggested a purge team with flamers and hymns and the appetite to use both. The debate roared, each voice carrying fear wrapped in discipline, until Serad's knuckles met the table. "Enough," Serad said, though he did not raise his voice. He stared at the ghost ship on the hololith until his reflection blurred into it. "We are the first. We endure." The words landed like a stamp. Even so, doubt clung to the air like smoke. They broke to their duties. Halver organized purge squads with hymns and promethium, promising his men that flame was the Emperor's grammar and he would use it to correct any sentence out of joint. Kyle retreated to his sanctum to write coordinates that did not exist, muttering course angles against a map of nowhere. Darnath stood by the torpedo console for an hour without touching it, hands clasped behind his back as if holding himself together. Varen asked to sleep in the chapel, and then did not sleep at all. On the lower decks, panic grew sharper, mess halls filled with mutters that curdled into arguments and then brawls. A rumor ran like a knife, that the boarding team had come back without their faces. A serf accused another of carrying the whispers into the ship. Knives flashed, blood spattered across ration tins, and the fight ended only when armsmen dragged the bodies away. In the bakery, a proofing oven door slammed by itself every few minutes until someone nailed it shut. The nails bent into smiles. On the pump deck, a string of prayer bells rang backwards for an hour. No one admitted to hearing them. The infirmary's bin of burned dressings overflowed. A medici sister with old plasma scars on her throat stitched a wound and whispered that the flesh closed reluctantly, as if it had other appointments. A wounded serf grabbed her wrist and begged her to cut out the forest from his chest. She pried his fingers free one by one and told him they did not do forestry. A deck scribe named Loran kept a diary in mean, neat script. He wrote by shrine light while the ship groaned. "The ship weeps, and the angels do not answer. My brothers quarrel like wolves. I fear the Emperor has abandoned us." The next page ended in an ink blot, as if the hand had been seized mid-stroke. The page after that was smeared by tears. "They say the oil bleeds. I saw it." The Aquila cried black. Later entries spiraled further. Visions of forests, winged shadows, his dead mother whispering that all things end in silence. His last words were an apology to a name no one recognized. When they found his body, he still clutched the quill, mouth filled with ink. A maintenance gang came back white-faced from a crawl space, insisting they had found a shrine hidden in the ducting, a child's toy sword, a braid of hair, a scrap of parchment with a childish drawing of a lion and a knight. When Halvar went to check, the duct was a straight run of pipe for 20 meters, nothing in it but dust and a single boot print facing the wrong way. Armsmen began to stake out the mess routes in pairs. They spoke in low tones, counting steps between shrines as if the numbers could hold the world still. The lights strobed on deck 12 for an hour, tinting everything an ugly theatre red. In that light, a priest beat a man senseless for laughing at the wrong moment, then wept as he bound the wounds. In the manufactorum bay, a crane swung slowly without power. It pointed like an accusing finger toward a wall stencil of the winged sword. Someone had painted a crude eye over the sword's hilt, and the paint had run as if the stencil were crying. The tech priests called it a chemical reaction. The men called it an omen and worked with their mouths set, as if clamping a bit between their teeth. Serad walked the halls of his ship without escort that night. He did it not for courage, but to feel the trouble in the deck through his boots, the way a man listens to a sick horse's breathing. Every shrine and every auspex chamber he passed whispered of unease. Serfs bowed quickly and avoided his gaze. Twice he saw men make the sign of the Aquila with only one wing, as if they feared to complete it. In one quiet shrine, he found the acolyte from Loran's notes, daubing fresh oil across a cracked Aquila. The boy trembled, muttering that the oil was weeping on its own. "Do you see?" he whispered, voice gone glassy. "It won't stop." The Aquila's eyes were black with the stuff, streaks running like tears that did not dry. Serad did not order a purge or a penance. He simply placed a gauntlet on the Aquila and prayed. He had not prayed since the Thramas campaign, when prayers were a bad joke told under shellfire, but the words came back as if they had been waiting inside his teeth. He kept his palm against the cold brass and felt a tiny tremor through the metal, like the throb of a dying bird in a hunter's hand. On his way out, he marked that the shrine lamps were guttering in a pattern, bright, dark, bright, bright, and he knew enough ship talk to recognize a code for distress. He said nothing. He did not feed the ship new names for its sickness. He left the shrine and took the long way back through the manufactorum. There, he stopped without meaning to. A strip of hazard yellow paint had cracked along a crosswalk. The pattern of the cracks made a shape that stabbed his memory. Calibanite script for oath. He did not like that at all. In the hangar, a crew chief had painted over a section of deck and ordered no one to step on it. When Serad asked why, the man said, "Because something under there is listening," and flinched at his own superstition. By the time Serad reached the strategium again, more reports had stacked up. A maintenance gang reported finding a suit of Terminator plate standing upright in an empty bay, lenses dark, gauntlets locked around the haft of a broken flail. There were no records of such a suit aboard. An auger technician swore that the Auspex had returned an echo of their own ship still tethered to the derelict by a chain of numbers that meant nothing and everything. A medici reported 3 identical burns on 3 different men from tools that were cold to the touch. None of it belonged in the same world, and yet here it was, stacking up like bad debt. Catalogue, quarantine, endure, Serad said, and heard the hollowness of ritual in it. He watched the hololith of the derelict revolve. For an instant the projection stuttered, and in that hiccup, the ship looked whole again, prow lit, proud as a cathedral. Then the image shivered and fell back into ruin. He told himself he had imagined it. Varun came to him with the look of a man who had seen his own funeral. "The deck called my name," he said, "from under the plating." Serad told him to go to the chapel and kneel until the bones in his knees taught him humility. Varun went and did not kneel. He sat on the steps and stared at the statue of the emperor as if waiting for it to blink. The last vox that shift came from a corridor labeled only with a number that didn't exist on the ship's plans. A man's voice, too calm, reported that he had found a door that opened onto forest, and he could hear hunting horns far away. The channel cut before anyone could answer. Halvir sent a squad. They found a blank wall and boot prints in a circle, as if someone had walked a doorway into the deck by pacing it. Serad dismissed the council at the third bell. Darnath lingered. "Permission to speak plainly," he said. "You always do," Serad said. Darnath watched the derelict flicker on the hollow. There are times when obedience is courage, and times when it is cowardice by another name. We are close to the line. If you give the word, I will make the torpedo blessing, and no one will gainsay you but Azrael, and he is far away. Serad did not answer that. He did not need to. The weight of the lion carved over the strategium doors, pressed between them like a third man listening. He dismissed Darnath, sat alone, and inked the first of the death chits. The pen dug and split. Ink bled into the fibers until each name wore a bruise. He stacked the chits neatly and pressed the brass stamp, honored in silence, hard enough to feel the plate bite through parchment into skin. He left the stamp on the table and watched the oil in the lamp tilt as the ship's gravity flexed, a tiny tide. A siren coughed twice and died. Somewhere deep, something heavy fell and kept falling, hitting rungs in a long, receding rhythm, like a prayer said down a well. Serad rose with the motion of a man choosing not to sleep. "We endure," he said to the empty room, and the empty room said nothing back. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 1, Scene 1, Discovery. Scene 2 followed. Wrath of Angels, Chapter 1, Scene 2, The Overseer, on the edge of the ruin storm. Month 10, year 256, the 41st millennium. Weeks later, a gunship broke void near the drifting corpse. No heraldry, no vox call. It came in like a patient knife, bleeding no light. Its hull painted the color of verdict. The ship's name was absent from every roll and register, because there are names that are not written, only carried. When it docked, pressure seals clamped with the sound of teeth. An interrogator chaplain stepped onto the gantry, veiled and nameless to all but Azrael. His crozius was chained across his back, not as a trophy, but as a promise. The chains themselves were etched with scripture that read differently depending on where you stood. His helm was black as judgment, visor a slit like a wound that had learned manners. Bone-white robes fell from his pauldrons like a shroud. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. Fear did the work of ceremony. 3 Mechanicum adepts followed in a nervous constellation, robes brushing, sensors clacking, data slates jittering against augmetic fingers. They wore fear like new clothes, not broken in, chafing at the joints. Magos Ephrion led them, a gaunt vertical man whose neck pistons made a faint ticking when he lied. His left eye was a nest of lenses that ratcheted wider at every new detail, as if surprise were a function. Engine seer Threx lumbered behind, broad-shouldered and pitted, his vox band perpetually one notch too loud. He coughed Binharic prayers with the sincerity of a factory whistle. Junior Lex Mechanic Hal came last, small and brittle, hugging a reliquary box of data scrolls to his chest like a child with a favorite book. Hal's flesh eye flicked to the chaplain's crozius every few steps, the way a man glances at a cliff's edge while insisting he is not afraid of heights. Serad met them at the lock with Darnath and Kyle in tow. No honor guard, only necessity. "You were expected," Serad said, which was true and not comforting. The chaplain inclined his helm a fraction, as if nodding were a concession to gravity. "I am sent," he said. voice like gravel that had been taught to speak. You will provide what is necessary. He turned without waiting and paced toward the sealed corridor to the hulk. The mechanicum scrambled after him, censer smoke leaving a trail that smelled of hot copper and cardamom, and something like old incense burned in a damp room. At the bulkhead, Servitor Chorus 12 sang the opening cant to awaken the lock. Its voices were off by a hair. You could hear the missing tongue in one throat and the wrong memory in another. The chaplain did not look at them. He placed a gauntlet against the seal and murmured a scrap of Calibanite scripture under his breath, a line older than the Imperium and angrier. The lock clicked with a sound almost grateful. They entered the Spear's hulk. The corridors were graves locked in stasis. The air was still and tasted faintly of rusted sugar. Blood had dried in ropes across walls, where gravity had failed and returned in fits. Ossuaries had spilled, femurs in neat piles like firewood, skulls that had cracked along old sutures. Companions lay where they had fallen, swords still buried in traitor flesh, the killing frozen in a tableau that refused to admit the passage of time. Litany scrolls clung to armour by the brittleness of their glue. A child's bead rosary had caught on a vambrace and hung there still, glittering like a joke. Ephraim gagged once, then made a hard little hand gesture that told his throat to behave. Hal covered his mouth and pretended it was to filter dust. Threx exhaled a string of clipped cants, blessings for stale air, for treacherous gravity, for memory that did not match the maps. The chaplain's vox rasped a litany that made the air heavier, as if the words were ballast. He moved without hurry, pausing over corpses with the care of a man reading, not looting. He leaned close to faces that had shrunken into knives and weighed what he saw there. Once, he whispered in Calibanite so softly, even the vox refused to repeat it. He could not help himself. The dead pull confession from the living. They passed a door half slagged by Melter. Threx rapped the frame with 3 knuckles, counting echoes. Breach vector inward, he declared. Friendly ordnance. He seemed to want someone to argue. No one did. Ephraim adjusted a lens until it clicked. Noted, he said, which meant he wished it could be unnoted. At a cross-junction, a mural ran along the wall, half destroyed by heat. A knight of Caliban hunted a lion through black forests. The paint still glistened, though it should have flaked to dust millennia ago. The hunter's spear point was bright, the lion's mane a smear of shadow with teeth in it. The adepts crossed themselves in Binharik, fingers ticking through a tiny algorithm of hope. The chaplain stood very still. The lion's eyes in the mural were gone, eaten away by void burn, leaving sockets that seemed to follow him. He did not like what that stirred. Memory is a trap for men who think themselves immune. He saw, as if on the underside of his lids, a hunt under Caliban's stars. Breath white, hounds low, the forest black ridges like ribs. He saw the moment when honor and truth first diverged, and how it had taken the shape of a road you could walk on for a lifetime. He breathed out, slow, and the visor fogged and cleared, and he was back in the corridor with the taste of ash on his tongue. "Proceed," he said, and the mechanicum obeyed as men obey orders that fit neatly into terror. They threaded an armory where relic blades lay shattered, some cut cleanly as if by a stroke too precise to be human. Bolters had melted into slag that cooled in lace patterns. The sigil of the winged sword had burned black onto a wall. Heat had bubbled the paint until the sword looked scabbed. A librarius fragment lay in ruin. Alcoves with cracked stasis vaults, still humming faintly, the sound like a bee trapped in a jar. Ash drifted in eddies. The smell was not only old paper, it had the edge of lightning scars and the sweetness of cooked marrow. Hal reached for a broken tome case with an impulse as foolish as love. The chaplain closed a hand around the boy's wrist. "Do not touch what remembers," he said. Hal nodded, eyes wide, and tucked his hands into his sleeves. Crypts lay deeper in, rows of sarcophagi broken along the seam, as if something had tried to open them from the inside and failed at the last tap. Names were half burned from plaques. You could read enough to know what you were missing. Someone had propped a pauldron against one casket like a flower. The reliquary beside it lay open, its contents dust, the silk lining unmarked. "Vacuum did this," Threx attempted, which developed into a question and died there. Vox shrines whispered fractured litanies on endless loop, voices overlaying until they became soup. The words slipped in and out of sense. Forgive, fallen, lion, again. The adepts flinched. Hal yanked the cable out of his own Vox set with shaking hands to make the sound stop. The chaplain pressed onward, each step a weight training the deck to bear it. They reached a short corridor where the bulkheads were dented from within. Not bullet scars, knuckles, 5 knuckles. The chaplain stood with his palm flat against one of the dents. It fit. "We brought them here alive," he said, and his voice did a thing inside the helm that might have been a swallowed curse. Ephrian's neck pistons ticked. "Data insufficient," he said, and knew he was lying. At a hatch etched with a sunburst sigil, the doors tried to stay shut. Threx chanted to them, coaxed them. The chaplain, without changing tone, recited a litany from the cloisters of the order, words iron by now, their meanings filed down to a clean edge. The doors compromised. They opened far enough for a man to pass single file, which is how confessions are delivered and executions done. The bridge lay beyond, that old cathedral of command. Consoles were dead, screens crazed. Cherub statues that once watched the captain's throne were headless, the shrapnel that took their faces still lodged in the plinths like answers. And yet the central hololith still flickered, faint, stubborn, like an exhausted heart refusing to stop. Dust swam lazily in the light and made galaxies that would never be mapped. The Mechanicum were not allowed in. The doors shuddered and slammed shut on them with an authority older than the ship itself. Ephrian squawked indignation. Threx pounded the panel. Hal said in a very small voice, "Sir," and meant father. The chaplain looked back once. "Stand," he said. It sounded like mercy. It was instruction. He was alone among the dead. He walked between consoles and sat bodies whose armour had cooled into shapes bones would never fit again. He knelt before the hololith, one gauntlet flat on the projection plate. The light stuttered and pulsed, a single thready beat. His mind became a forge. It always did here, in rooms like this. Confession chambers that had been called bridges by men who preferred maps to sins. He felt the ship's gaze pressing back through the flicker, a presence that was not mind exactly, but long habit hardened into something like personality. Machine spirits are not souls. They are grooves in metal where souls have worn themselves. He despised the Mechanicum's hunger for machine above martyr, but he was not stupid. He spoke a litany under his breath, not to banish spirits, but to chain his own thoughts so they did not run where he could not follow. The hololith pulsed again. He allowed himself to imagine for a heartbeat that it was agreement. He rewound what the room wanted to tell him. Brother against brother, close work, no time for speeches. The angles of fire had been intimate. Some of the kills were mercy, some were not. A console surface had smeared where a hand tried to leave a final mark and lost the argument with friction. There was the ghost of a sign there, half a wing maybe, or half something else. He did not trace it. He remembered Caliban's forests again when he did not want to. Lion hunts, cloisters, Oaths spoken in the voice you save for God and for lies. He remembered the first time he questioned whether the hunt was holy or merely necessary, and how the answer had been given by a man he loved in words that said both. He remembered drawing judgment from a boy and telling himself it was mercy because the boy would not live to profit from it. He pressed his palm harder to the hololith until the edge bit and he could hold the memory down without breaking it open. He voxed on a ciphered channel that had only one other ear. Confirmed, he said. Brothers slew brothers. The stain runs deeper than even the records admit. Azrael's reply came cold and clean. Record all. Speak nothing. I alone will read. The words were a door closing gently. The chaplain bowed his head. As commanded, he said, and very softly, like a man praying not to be heard by God. As deserved. He rose and walked to the captain's throne. It had the arrogance of empty furniture. He placed 2 fingers on the armrest, the way a priest touches a relic he does not entirely trust. The leather had dried and split into a map of deltas. A tiny fleck of bone sat in one of the cracks, white as a seed. He did not move it. He knew better than to tidy. The dead hate that. Behind the throne, a wall plaque held a list of battle honors. The words were scorched, the victories unreadable. He stared until the letters became patterns, and the patterns threatened to become meanings he could not afford. He looked away. On his way out, he paused beside a body sprawled across a Vox console. The helm had been removed carefully, the face composed. The hands were locked around a rosarius. The chain had bitten into the palms so hard the links were printed in flesh. He bent close. The man's lips were cracked, parted as if to speak. The chaplain found himself wanting, against all habit, to know the last word. He leaned in until his own helm reflected in the dead man's eye like a black sun. He did not learn the word. The dead kept it. The doors opened for him without argument this time. The adepts stood where he had left them, as if obedience were the only solid ground available. Ephrian's neck pistons were calm again. He had told himself a story he could work with. Threx had adopted a posture he thought looked like vigilance. Hal had been crying and believed no one could tell. Proceed, the chaplain said. No relic is to be moved. No body is to be disturbed that does not bar transit. Record. Do not interpret. He glanced at Hal, who flinched from the attention like a man from a thrown knife. Especially you. They retraced one corridor and turned down another the ship insisted had always been there. Their lamps found a chapel tucked into the hull like a forgotten tooth. The altar was stained black where oil had burned. A stack of votive plates had fused into a column of warps and bubbles. On the wall behind, someone had carved with a knife until the blade broke. I am sore. The last letter was a long horizontal, dragged downward when the knife failed. The line ended in a smear of blood that had dried in waves, like tide marks. Threx lifted a mechadendrite toward it. The chaplain caught the limb mid-extension and closed his fist until servos squealed. Record. Do not interpret. In a comms blister, they found an astropath station with the restraints still buckled, though no body sat in them. The restraints were dented outward. The headset had teeth marks. The floor beneath the chair was scored in concentric circles by boot heels. Hal started whispering numbers. Ephrian shook him once, sharply, and the numbers stopped. A side passage opened into a munitions locker. A second Astartes lay there, ivory plate cracked along the gorget, eyes filmed over like ponds in winter. A clean round hole sat dead center of the brow. The chaplain held his gaze for a full measure of time. Mercy, he said, and Threx, who had seen 1,000 factory deaths and called none of them by name, looked at him as if he had taught a machine to weep. The chaplain did not explain. Mercy is a language men have to learn alone. They reached a blast door that had sealed on a timer that never finished counting. It had jammed an inch shy of closed. Beyond, the deck dropped away into open ribs, void glaring like a judgment too bright to look at. Through those torn bones you could see a scattering of stars and, if you stood just so, the wake glimmer of Serad's ship like a candle in a cemetery. The chaplain stood at the threshold and lifted his chin to that cold. His vox picked up the whisper of his own breath, grainy like an old recording. The mural on the far wall, the hunting knight, was visible at an angle. From here the lion's eyeless sockets seemed almost kind. Memory is a trick knife. Back, he said. We have enough. The adepts obeyed with the selfish haste of men whose courage has a measured half-life. On the return step, Ephrion found his voice. My lord, he said, crisp to hide the tremor. We will require authority to stabilize the hololith core for extraction. No extraction, the chaplain said. Ephrion blinked his lens nest. The data is unique. So is the stain, the chaplain said, and made the decision feel like the world had always been that way. Threx tried a different angle. We can isolate the machine's spirit, cage it behind triple sanctums, thread it with wards. It will not bite. It has already bitten, the chaplain said. We will not keep its teeth. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Authority seeped from him like heat. Hal ventured a syllable that might have become why, and swallowed it whole when the chaplain's helm turned a degree in his direction. They crossed the turning where the mural watched. The chaplain did not look this time. Men think they can starve memory by not feeding it their eyes. It works until it doesn't. At the lock back to Serad's ship, the servitors sang the closing cant. The harmony was better. Something in the rhythm of the dead had taught them the note. The chaplain paused before stepping across. He looked back down the corridor into the hulk's quiet. He was not given to poetry, but the word that walked through his mind was wound. He sealed the lock and stripped his helm only once he was back under Serad's lights. His face looked carved by the same artisan who had done the cherubs, edges adamant, mercy filed thin. His eyes were a problem that had not slept in days. Serad met him in the transfer antechamber. No handshakes, no mutual pretendings. Report, Serad said. The chaplain lifted a canteen a fraction under his veil and drank like a man who knew water could be taken away as easily as breath. You are right to fear, he said, then sealed the helm again. When he spoke into the privacy of coded vox, his words had edges built into them. Confirmed. Brothers slew brothers. I will record. You will not speak. Azrael will read. Serad's jaw made the movement that meant he had accepted orders he wanted to refuse. And the dead? They will keep, the chaplain said, which meant nothing and everything. He walked past Serad as if the corridor had been drawn to his scale. He withdrew into the stratagem's chapel and turned hunger into a tool. Fasting until lips split is a way to make judgment feel earned. He recorded every sigil and relic he had witnessed onto parchment scrolls with a hand that did not shake. Crimson wax seals were pressed with the seal of a sword cutting a circle. He wrote like a man paying a debt in exact coin. When ink ran thin, he cut it with sacramental oil. When the pen snagged, he did not swear. He sharpened it with the patience of a tailor making a shroud. Ephrion submitted requests on a timed schedule. Stabilize, map, probe, extract. Each requisition tidier than the last, as if elegance could be a lever against command. Each came back denied with the same note in the margin. Record. Do not interpret. Threx took to prowling the hangar, glowering at cranes that refused to squeal when he wanted them to. He threatened to exercise a loading arm with a wrench. Hal, shaken by the sight of the "I am" saw, copied the damaged inscription into his notebook a dozen times, and dreamed a hand finishing it. He woke each time before the last letter and thanked the machine god for small mercies that may have been someone else's. The chaplain did sleep once, sitting upright in the pews like a corpse propped for viewing. In his sleep, he hunted a lion that was not the lion, and came back to wakefulness with his mouth full of a word he would not say even in an empty room. He rose and bled a little into the oil lamp, and called it sacrifice, because names are cages, and cages are useful. He asked for nothing. He took nothing. When Serad visited, the chaplain lifted his helm just enough to drink water, and in that slit Serad saw that the man behind the armour was a furnace that had burned away its smoke. "You are right to fear," the chaplain murmured to him. Not comfort, just confirmation, and sealed the helm again. Out beyond them, the hulk continued to drift and remember. The Mechanicum made tidy lists of things that could not be catalogued. The crew traded rumours like cigarettes in a place with no air, that the chaplain had made the mural blink, that he had spoken a word in the hololith that made every servo on the deck seize for a heartbeat, that he had judged a servitor and it had repented. None of it was true. The truth was smaller and worse. He had looked, and knowing had set hooks in him. At the edge of third watch, when the ship's bells were too tired to chime properly and only coughed, the chaplain finished the last of his scrolls. He rolled them with the tenderness men save for letters they will never send. He sealed the bundle with wax and pressed the signet until the circle closed. He did not pray over it. He did not ask for blessing. He had a job, and the job had him. He keyed the cipher channel and spoke quietly. Archive prepared. Silence maintained. He waited for the answering click that meant acknowledgement. Azrael's voice came not with comfort, but with weight. Hold. The line died. The chaplain stood in the hush, listening to the engine's distant animal murmur, and felt the shape of what was coming press against the inside of the world, like something trying to be born the wrong way round. He extinguished the lamp, which did not make the room darker. He sat, hands on knees, and regarded the crozius chained across his back, the way a man thinks about a blade he promised not to draw. He had not brought it to bear on the dead. He would not. There are lines even zeal will not cross. But there are other uses for a hammer that believes itself a key. Outside, the hulk turned once in its sleep. The mural's empty eyes watched no one. The hololith's tired heart did not yet stop. The wound stayed open. Next, the ship would start to bleed. This has been Wrath of Angels. Chapter 1, Scene 2. The Overseer. Scene 3 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 1, Scene 3. Echoes. On the edge of the ruin storm. Month 11, year 256. The 41st millennium. After the chaplain's return, the ship learned a new silence. It wasn't the clean kind that follows prayer. It was the kind you get after a scream when everyone is waiting to see if it comes back with teeth. Orders were spoken more softly, as if sound itself might crack a seal. Men stopped clearing their throats before speaking, lest the ship mistake it for a code. The chaplain gave no report to the crew. He took his vigil in the Strategium's chapel and wrote until his hands blackened with ink. Serad visited once and saw, through a lifted veil, eyes like iron filings drawn to a magnet. "You are right to fear," the chaplain said, and turned back to the page, as if the page might try to leave if he didn't pin it with attention. Rumours bloomed like mould in damp corners, easy to disturb, dangerous to inhale. A mess sergeant swore there were new deck numbers stamped on bulkheads that hadn't been there yesterday. A rigger claimed the lifts moved even when unpowered, ferrying nothing between floors with dutiful patience. On deck 14, a prayer wheel, rusted solid since before anyone could remember, started spinning by itself just fast enough to sound like breath. In the low bunk barracks, men learned to sleep in pairs, back to back, and to pretend it was tactical. Sentry rotations shortened because attention had a half-life in this place. On the gunnery deck, a veteran named Eno kept a tally stick of things that weren't there a moment ago. He gave up after the tally reached 40, and he ran out of space between the nicks where he'd notched the dead. Voices began to call from places where voices had no business. A deckhand heard his dead brother whisper from a sealed hatch, using a childhood insult so specific it made his hands shake. When the armsman dragged him away, he sobbed with fury, like a man denied bread. A pipe fitter chased the sound of his mother's cough down 3 ladders and across a coolant trench. When he found the source, it was a cracked pressure valve, whistling in a tone that should not exist. The astrogation dome was where the worst of it pooled. Astropaths ate madness first when the fabric of a place frayed, because they had more doors in them than other people. Their choir pit was ringed in brass and skulls and blindfolds. It still smelled of old incense and burnt hair no matter how often it was scrubbed. That day, the wards etched into the floor were warm to the touch, like stones in a river in summer. The astropaths sat strapped into their thrones, hands bound in ritual cloth, voices barely above a murmur as they plotted routes through seas that hated boats. It hit them as a sequence. The first astropath stiffened and spoke with someone else's mouth. A lion, he said, but made of ash. Mane on fire. Paws like chapters. He wept tears that smelled of copper and smiled like a man remembering a joke he once loved. A second began to hum the cadence of the chapter litany out of order, skipping every third line as if there were holes where memory should be. The third whispered in old Calibanite to a father he'd never had, to forgive him for sins he didn't recognize. The fourth threw his head back so hard the strap creaked and shouted a coordinate string that mapped to nowhere any sane chart could name. The fifth begged, full-voiced, for someone to take the sight from him because the sights were wrong. The sixth tuned himself to the lion. He saw it pacing down long decks, claws clicking like rosary beads, each step a bell. It left paw prints that were not prints at all but names, and the names were not names but charges, and the charges were not charges but debts. The lion walked to the choir pit and laid its head in the sixth's lap and purred until the man's teeth rattled loose. When he tried to stroke its mane, his fingers bled. "Mercy," he said in a voice like the chaplain's, and the lion opened its mouth and all the candles burned sideways. They shrieked together then, not as a choir, but as an accident. Serad arrived at a run with Kale and 2 armsmen and the chaplain on his heels, cloak a quiet storm. The choir matron cut straps with a blade worn down to a habit. One astropath hurled himself sideways and drove his skull into the wall with the calm determination of a man putting a nail in. Blood ticked from his scalp in an irregular metronome. The others writhed and retched and prayed to names that had never belonged to them. The wards smoked. One of the brass skulls wept oil from its eyes that tracked in a neat line down to the floor. The chaplain crouched before the sixth, whose eyes were full of stars and older things, and put 2 fingers to the man's brow. "Close the door," he said like a father. The man choked on a syllable that should not have fit in his throat and went still. Not dead, just shut. Matron shook, but her hands were professional. "I can hold 3, she panted. "The others?" The chaplain nodded once, which counted as consent and comfort both. He turned to the rest and spoke a litany not from any book, a thing hammered into him by long use. "The hunt ends where you choose," he said, which is a lie that works if you say it like a truth. He walked the circle, touching brow after brow, bleeding his presence like cauterizing heat into each shaking mind. It was not mercy so much as triage for souls. Kyle tasted iron and static, the way air tastes before lightning strikes. He dragged Serad back a pace by instinct. Serad's jaw worked, a man trying not to grind his teeth into confession. "Report," he said to the matron when breath remembered him. She gave it in clipped phrases. He recorded it in his head as numbers, as if that would make it clean. When they could be moved, the astropaths were carried out past the lines of skulls, each skull's eyeports fogging faintly as if watching. The sixth clung to the chaplain's gauntlet with both hands. "Did we do it?" he asked in a child's voice. "You endured," the chaplain said, which was the only blessing he had, being honest. After that, the ship walked differently. People shortened their steps unconsciously, unwilling to make echoes. When someone laughed, heads snapped as if a weapon had been drawn. In the mess hall, bowls clinked with the sound of instruments being set down before surgery. A cook on the night shift stopped stirring a vat mid-turn and did not remember starting again. When asked why, she said the surface had breathed. The journals multiplied. Loran's neat script had become a model. Men copied the shape of his letters like camp followers of a dead saint. They wrote down small badnesses in order to keep the large ones from expanding into the spaces between their ribs. Day 1, heard it say my name. Day 2, heard it say my son's. Day 3, heard it say a name I do not have and loved it. Day 4, slept at shrine with my back to God. Day 5, dreamed the forest again, trees like polearm blades, leaves black as oil. Day 6, smelled meat. Day 7, woke with splinters in my mouth. Day 8, the splinters were not wood. One entry was a shopping list that ended with rope. Another was addressed to a woman whose name was crossed out every time, until the page tore where the pen had worried it. One man wrote a letter to the emperor and sealed it with a carefully drawn aquila that looked like a drowning bird. Discipline faltered, then flared, then faltered again. Darnith's drills bit deep for a day, and the men felt better until night pulled the teeth out again. Kyle caught 2 junior officers trying to map where the whispers were loudest and where they were pleading. He confiscated the map and then memorized it before burning it. Halvir started carrying a little bell he'd taken from a child's cot in the reliquary. He rang it when tempers rose and called the sound reset. No one liked it, and it worked, which only made them like it less. On second watch, a serf slit his throat before an icon of the emperor using a piece of mirror he'd snapped out of his locker. He whispered thanks as blood sprayed the altar in a spatter so fine it looked like breath. He smiled with all his teeth and none of his lips. The chaplain arrived in time to close the man's eyes. The corpse kept trying to open them, a twitch in the lids like a fish on a line. The chaplain placed 2 fingers on the brow and said a word that is not written in any book, and the twitching stopped. On third watch, 2 armsmen fought a ritual duel in the pipe run, betting not money, but nights of unbroken sleep. The winner slept 8 hours and woke screaming because his dreams had not remembered to be nightmares. The absence terrified him. He begged Halvir for punishment to make the world feel correct. Halvir obliged with drill until the man vomited and thanked him after. On fourth watch, the ovens on the bakery deck came on by themselves and baked nothing until the air smelled of sweet heat and fear. Someone put a bowl of ration paste inside to make the smell have meaning. The paste burned to black crust, and the smell did not change. The officers fractured quietly. Darnath became a man of schedules and pen strokes, counting casualties, issuing orders with the calm of a man who intends to pick up his dignity off the floor later. Kyle went the other way and stopped pretending that the numbers would save him. He argued with Darnath with a priest's politeness and a gambler's eyes. Verun tried to resign his commission to Serad 3 times in a row, each time using a different reason. The men need a braver officer. My name is on the hull. I am afraid. And each time Serad rejected the resignation with the same 2 words. Noted. Denied. Serad stopped sleeping. He took catnaps like taxis, under protest. In his private chamber, he recorded a confession into a sealed Vox capsule, knowing it could never be sent. He spoke of doubt, as if it were a lover who had moved into the next room and refused to leave. He spoke of duty as if it were a blade he had sat down on and could not find a way to stand again without bleeding. He tried to say Azrael's name without bitterness and failed once out of 3. When he was finished, he held the capsule until it was warm, then placed it in the brazier. The wax popped as it caught. He watched the smoke crawl up the chimney like a sentence with bad grammar and prayed that the ashes would find someone who had the right to forgive him. The phantom double of the spear made itself known in the machine before it showed in the eye. Tech Marines at the auger pits started seeing a second trace, faint as breath on glass, sliding in their wake like an obedient pet. Contacts? Darnath demanded, but the contacts did not answer to rules of range or bearing. They were there and not there, and they grew stronger the more the men looked at them. Stop looking, Hal suggested without irony. The Tech Marines did, and the trace stayed. It's learning, someone said, which was not a helpful sentence to say aloud. The cogitators misbehaved like clever children. A screen displayed an old service roster from the Spear, names half familiar, ranks wrong. When Cale scrolled, he found his own name spelled correctly and dated before he was born. A door on Deck 7 refused to open for its assigned code, but yielded to a hymn hummed under the breath. A maintenance drone asked for orders in a voice that had belonged to a man cremated a decade ago. When reprimanded for imposture, it turned off and did not turn on again, and the tech priest hung a votive from its arm with embarrassed tenderness. The chaplain picked his way through all of this like a man navigating a broken altar. He did not offer comfort. He offered definitions. This is not a haunting, he said once to a squad who wanted to hear that word. It is a memory. The distinction helped some, angered others, and made no difference to the dead. The day broke, if you can call it that in a place that does not do days, when the Astropath Fifth began to sing. He sang the March of the Legion, but the notes fell between the notes. He made harmonies that were not legal in this universe. He sang names. Some of the names were men on Serad's crew. Some were dead men from records. Some were names no one in the room had ever heard and loved instantly. He sang until blood ran from his ears and pooled in the cup of his collarbone, and he smiled like a bridegroom. The matron slapped him across the face with furious tenderness. "Stop," she said, and he did. The chaplain stood behind her with his hands folded as if to keep from using them. "He's seeing roots," matron said through her teeth. "But they're not roots that lead to places. They're roots that lead to answers." She did not say whether answers were worse than places. The phantom began to press in even on the men who had sworn to look away. An engine rating on the subdecks heard the turbine's rhythm shift to mirror his own heartbeat. When he held his breath, the engines did too. A woman on the comms bridge picked up a handset and listened to 10 seconds of her own future conversation, then spoke the words she had already heard and became an echo of herself. A boy in the kitchens poured water and watched the surface ripple, as if something beneath had turned over to get comfortable. Then the laughter started. It came from somewhere close and nowhere at all, a short, jagged laugh like a cough with an edge in it. It never lasted long. It interrupted conversations with perfect timing, and then left the sentence hanging in humiliation. Men tried to joke through it. Jokes do not do well when mocked by structure. Serad called a council and found he had nothing to say that would be new and useful. The chaplain came and stood with his hands clasped behind his back, like a statue rehearsing compassion. Vardath argued for torpedoes with the measured obscenity of a man who wants permission to be a coward because he has decided it would be courage. Kale argued for obedience with the fire of a convert who dreads losing faith. Varun stood with a wet-eyed stubbornness that made Serad want to hit him and hug him in equal measures. Azrael says hold, Serad said finally, and the words were heavier than they should have been. We hold. The council dissolved into orders. Out in the corridors, two men came to blows over whether a shadow belonged to one of them. In the shrine, a priest replaced the oil and found the new oil weeping before it could be poured. In the strategium, Serad stared at the hololith, which threw up the Hulk's outline with the faint double glimmer of its phantom, and pretended there were numbers he could plug into that would make it stop being a wound. He drafted a letter to Azrael he would never send. It began with honorifics and ended with a question that was not a question. Why do you chain us to this tomb? He did not sign it. He burned it. Smoke wrote a shape that made him think of the Calibanite script for oath again, and he ground his teeth until the shape broke. The ship made one last attempt to be kind before it remembered what it was. A siren misfired, and instead of the usual bray, it played the first bar of an old hunting call. Men turned their heads like hounds. The lights dimmed to the exact level of a Caliban moon. The vents breathed the smell of rain on stone. Someone started crying, because relief is a pain too. For 30 heartbeats, the world held its breath. Then the Auspex screamed. Shadows bloomed where none should be. A rash across the scopes, a bloom of false returns clustering in the shape of their own hull. The phantom double of the spear hunched alongside, its outline a perfect mirror sliding closer until it seemed the two ships would collide not in space but in meaning. Vox channels died mid-word, lumen strips stuttered, and then burned steady in a color no one wanted to name. Bulkhead doors hissed open in sequence like a mouth showing teeth. Fires broke out in the manufactorum, clean blue tongues that tasted irreplaceable things first. Alarms howled and then corrected themselves into a polite chime that somehow made men run faster. A serf staggered into the strategium, raving that he had seen figures walking the exterior hull without suits, their eyes ember bright. Vardath ordered him confined, and then followed him to the cell because he wanted the man to be lying, and he wanted to see if lies still worked here. Poltergeist activity spread with a bureaucrat's efficiency. Doors slammed in response to the wrong key phrases. Icons toppled and broke across the faces of saints who had been looking away at the time. In one mess hall, the utensils levitated and then stabbed downward into tables with the neatness of a parade. A man set his hand down, and a fork pinned it to the wood as if it had rehearsed. He said thank you and fainted. Armsmen opened fire on shadows only they could see. The rounds hit exactly where they didn't. A tech marine took a bullet in a pauldron and turned with the slow fury of a man who has been interrupted by a child during delicate work. He found no shooter to punish and punished the nearest screw by tightening it to a torque that would shear it in a week. The chaplain stood at the heart of it with his crozier still chained. He spoke into the vox in the tone that hammers have when they explain what nails are. Hold your breath. Hold your ground. Hold your tongue unless you have a prayer in it. There will be no heroics. There will be no speeches. There will be no last stands. Stand first. Men obeyed. The ones who didn't disappear had a way of discovering they wanted to. In his chamber, Serad received a sealed cipher from Azrael, carried by a courier in black who refused to speak, because speech would have been a choice. Serad broke the seal and read. His face hardened, that familiar armour. His eyes betrayed him by being human. He read it again to see if words could forgive themselves. They didn't. He turned the parchment over, as if the order might have a second side where it explained itself. It didn't. A drip from a cracked pipe above ticked time into the quiet. He whispered, "We endure," and made the sentence sound like a chain. He stepped back into the corridor, and the corridor stepped with him, because the ship had learned his rhythm. He walked to the strategium through a world that was still itself and not itself, men doing jobs with hands that shook, lights burning with tired faith, the hum of engines steady as a lie told for someone's sake. Behind him, in the chapel, the chaplain's lamp went out. He did not relight it. Some nights are for dark. The echo of the phantom pressed closer, a twin that had grown bored of pacing and wanted to overlap. The hololith showed two shapes merging, and a tech marine tried to fix it by tapping the edge of the display, because sometimes that works, and he needed it to this once. It flickered and returned to the same wound. The ship inhaled. Men across 3 decks held their breath because they felt it, and the human animal remembers old rules even when it forgets numbers. Somewhere deep in the hull, something heavy began to move. It didn't scrape. It flowed, like a crowd changing its mind. The echoes were done echoing. The ship was about to answer. This has been Wrath of Angels. Chapter 1, Scene 3, Echoes. Scene 4 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 1, Scene 4, The Wound. On the edge of the ruin storm. Month 11, year 256. The 41st millennium. The Auspex screamed in the deep of the third watch. Not the staccato bursts the crew knew, but a single, unwavering tone that flattened thought, like a nail driven through skull and deck alike. Tech Marines tore at the panels, pried out cables, even tried to smash the sirens with augmetic fists. The sound bled through bone regardless. It wasn't coming from the machine. It was coming from the void, and the machine was only repeating it. On every scope, the phantom spear loomed. Its outline matched theirs to the rivet, a perfect twin drifting closer. But where their ship's hull was scored and honest with wear, the phantom gleamed with a wrong newness. Every plate whole, every scar erased. A mirror image, yes, but a mirror that lied. Crewmen squinted through portholes and swore a second prow drifted alongside, windows lit with familiar lanterns. Some insisted they saw themselves at those windows, peering back with tilted heads, mouths moving a half-second late. An auger officer shouted that his own reflection blinked out of time with him. He clawed the screen apart to prove it and cut his hands to ribbons. The glass gave a small, satisfied sigh. On deck 12, manufacturing crews tried to weld a bulkhead when the shadows thickened beyond it. Sparks fell in showers, the seam ran bright, and when they stepped back, the door peeled open again like paper. The torches guttered and spat black fire that clung to their gloves. The weld chief shook his hand until bones popped. "It's still holding me," he said, and he meant the fire. Shrines wept oil, not the clean golden sort that sweetened hinges, but tarry black, thick as morning. A lector scraped one clean with his sleeve. The stain crawled back before his eyes. Another priest swore he heard an Aquila speak. Not words, only breath, shaped like a dying man's sigh. They found him an hour later, tongue bitten in half, hands locked around the icon, as if trying to strangle mercy. Reports flooded the strategium. A hull patrol babbled that men walked the exterior plating bareheaded, eyes ember bright. Their officer called them mad, until a second patrol returned with the same tale, each man pale and stubbornly silent, when asked if he'd seen his own gate among the walkers. Doors began to inhale and exhale in long sequences, a corridor at a time. 2 armsmen were crushed to paste in one hiss. The bulkhead retracted gently, almost politely, releasing them as a smear. The mess hall learned new tricks. Spoons and knives rose a hand's span and turned in air, then plunged in neat rows, a parody of discipline. One trooper had his palm stapled to the wood by his own fork. He tried to laugh and managed only a sob that cracked into a wail. Another put a round through the cutlery. The bullet vanished mid-flight, then clinked out of the gravy boat 10 minutes later without a dent. Auspec's logs began anticipating the world. On deck 9, a station printed its own destruction 3 hours before the fire. The sheet curled in heat while the machine still sat, unscorched and smug. Its operator fainted. When he woke, he asked why his lungs hurt. The medici did not tell him he'd already screamed them raw at a future. In the choir pit, the astropaths seized in unison. Straps bit. Wards smoked. One sang the Legion March between the notes. Another begged forgiveness from brothers he had never met, speaking old Calibanite with a Palatine accent he could not have known. The matron's blade sawed at leather that writhed like snakes. The chaplain entered, set his gauntlet on a brow, and every voice went silent, too silent, like lungs held beneath water. The matron's breath stuttered in the void they left. Then the courier came, black-clad, face-shrouded, silent because speech would have been a choice. He delivered a wax-sealed cipher to Serad's chamber, bowed once, and left without taking his shadow with him. Serad broke the seal alone. Azrael's words were few. Their weight was not. He read them twice, then a third time, lips shaping the lines as if repetition might conjure a kinder meaning. None came. His eyes stung. His hands shook once, then steadied by force. He turned the parchment over, stared at the broken seal until it blurred. The cracked pipe above him dripped with the precision of a tolling bell. "Why do you chain us to this tomb?" he whispered. Water answered with the patience of gravity. For a dangerous heartbeat, he pictured torpedoes blooming along launch rails, a clean holocaust to cauterize the wound. He tasted the recoil in his teeth and called it release. Then he saw Azrael's eyes, cold as the void, cut from duty, and remembered there is no release for the first. Not here, not now. He returned to his officers and offered only 3 words. "We endure still." The phrase fell like a gravestone across their shoulders. The derelict stirred. Engine housings groaned like a giant arranging itself in the grave. Lights guttered and coughed alive along dead spines of plating. The hololith in the stratagem pulsed, no longer flicker, but heartbeat, showing twin outlines bleeding together until no augur could swear which belonged to them and which to the phantom. Tech marines screamed litanies through bloody noses as they jacked deeper into the consoles. The machines refused to resolve. They only echoed. Decks shifted, cups slid uphill, candles guttered sideways, flames like fingers pointing wrong. A stew pot emptied itself onto the ceiling and slapped back down. Men swore from terror at the sight, not from burns. Down in the pump runs, a child's cot bell taken as a charm by Halvir began to ring by itself in a steady, terrible tempo. He grabbed the string to still it. The bell kept swinging in his fist until he let go and apologized. Across 3 decks, knees hit metal. Not reverence, gravity. Bolts rattled in their seats. Saints shook on their pedestals and looked ready to step down and ask for weapons. In the strategium, Serad's hands tightened on the brass rail until his knuckles split. Blood ran, black in the hololith's green. The chaplain stood at his shoulder with his crozier still chained, voice on the vox steady as hammering. "Hold your breath. Hold your ground. Hold your tongue unless there's a prayer in it. No speeches, no last stands. Stand first. Men obeyed. Those who didn't turned up later in accounts payable to the void. A secondary hololith sputtered on a side dais, one the crew rarely used. It was older, temperamental, a relic men avoided because it remembered too much. It came awake now of its own will and threw up a schematic of their vessel as it had been centuries ago. Every deck neat, every shrine in place, every corridor straight. The newer hololith beside it showed the ship as she was, patched, reworked, honest with scar. The two images drifted, failed to align, drifted again, then locked. Two worlds forced into the same shape. Someone whispered, merging, and wished the word had a softer mouth. On the exterior cams, something moved in the void between hulls, where there should have been nothing. Not men, not ghosts, shadows with weight. They paced the space like hounds brought to heel. One turned its head and stared into the lens with interest. The feed froze for a heartbeat, then returned with the shadow closer. Techs crossed themselves with greasy fingers and lied, glare. The ship inhaled. Every candle on every shrine dimmed, flared and went out. The air tasted of hot iron and old rain. Far below, somewhere inside the derelict where light had no business, a coil of lumen winked along a corridor and died. Winked and died. Countable if you had the kind of mind that counted steps to prove the floor would still be there. The Spear of Caliban, dead for millennia, breathed. Its phantom pressed closer, overlapping, until even the air felt doubled in the lungs. Crew saw two ships and none. The bell on Halva's string kept time with the hololith's pulse. Astropaths hissed, as if holding back a word that should not be said in a place this flammable. Tech Marines sobbed in rage at screens that insisted on telling the same lie with perfect sincerity. Serad closed his eyes. On the inside of his lids, the shadow ship waited, patient and hungry, a reflection with teeth. He thought of the stamp honored in silence, and wanted, for one exhausted instant, a new one. Released. He opened his eyes instead. Stations, he said, and the word behaved like a plank laid over a hole. The wound remained open. It would not scab. It wanted to be a mouth. The deck vibrated a fraction deeper, the note of a great engine remembering itself. Somewhere, the laugh returned, the short, jagged cough of mirth with an edge in it, perfectly timed to slit the moment. Men twitched as if struck. The sound came again from the opposite side of the room, then from nowhere at all, indifferent to distance, delighted by structure. Stand, the chaplain repeated, and even the laugh paused to listen. The twin ships, scarred and pristine, lay over each other like sins and their excuses. The hololith beat. The void pressed. The chapter leaned, poised, on the last breath before cost. This has been Wrath of Angels. Chapter 1, Scene 4. The Wound. Scene 5 follows. Wrath of Angels. Chapter 1. Scene 5. The Cost. On the edge of the ruin storm. Month 12, year 256. The 41st millennium. The wounded filled the hangar bay like cargo no one wanted to inventory. Stretchers lined the deck until the pattern resembled a grid, each row a broken equation. Apothecaries moved with mechanical precision, sawing armour apart, stitching skin that no longer bled. The stench was arithmetic, copper, promethium smoke, and the sweet rancid tang of opened viscera. Candles guttered in pools of oil, wax dripping into maps of continents no cartographer would claim. A boy no older than 16 staggered in with half his scalp gone. He tried to salute with the arm he still had, and collapsed before the gesture was finished. An apothecary caught him by reflex, hissed a curse through clenched teeth, and let the corpse slide gently to the deck. There was no time for reverence. The dead were counted in stacks, not names. One intercessor still breathed with his throat cut nearly through, lungs blowing bubbles in his own blood. An apothecary clamped the wound and muttered a prayer as his reductor needle pierced the man's chest. The prayer ran out before the heart did. Another warrior, both legs gone to shrapnel, bit down on a rosary bead to stifle screams as they cauterized the stumps. When he spat the bead out, it was cracked down the center. He asked for it back and tucked it under his tongue. Others fared worse. A Marine, ribs shattered, refused anesthetic and tried to rise from the table. "Not yet," he snarled, voice thick with blood. "I have vows to finish." He collapsed moments later, dragging down the tray of instruments with him, scalpels clattering like coins scattered on stone. The apothecary let him fall. There were too many still living who could be saved. The instruments lay uncollected, gleaming faintly in the hangar's light, as if waiting for the next body. A junior serf wandered the rows with a censer, spreading incense against the stink. His smoke trailed in letters that almost formed words. He shut his eyes and told himself it was only draft currents. He walked faster, as if outrunning what the smoke wanted to say. It was then the Watcher appeared. Small, hooded, faceless, its robes the color of dust and moonlight. It stood among the stretchers without sound, its tiny hands folded. The serfs recoiled, whispering of omens, of death given shape. Astartes pretended not to see it, their discipline armor against fear. But the chaplain inclined his head, ever so slightly, as if acknowledging a fellow custodian of silence. The Watcher did not move. It simply remained, present in the tally, as if it too had come to take account. Some swore its hood turned fractionally toward the stamping chambers, as though already keeping score. Armsmen dragged a shackled serf down a maintenance spine toward the execution chamber. He wept, not loudly, but with the tight breaths of a man who had been holding fear in too long. His crimes were mutiny in whispers, disobedience in tone, spreading panic with eyes that would not behave. He pleaded that he had only been afraid, that he had not meant the words the walls made him say. The armsman escorting him thought of soup. He thought of how it had tasted watered that morning, how it would taste watered again tonight. He marched as if the crying behind him were weather, yet the plea lodged under his ribs. Part of him envied the serf's release, the clean finality of it. His own fear had no such door waiting. He wondered if the chaplain might ever turn the Crozius on him, and if he would have the courage to beg as honestly. The chamber waited. The chaplain stood within, Crozius unchained now, the weapon heavy as a verdict. The head of the hammer glowed faintly in the dark, scripture etched along its wings like veins of fire. The serf fell to his knees. No words were exchanged. The chaplain raised the Crozius and brought it down. The sound it made was final, not loud, like a door closing on purpose. For an instant, the armsman thought he saw flame lick along the haft, as though the relic itself hungered for confession. He told himself later it was a trick of oil smoke. He did not believe himself. In the strategium, Serad sat alone with a stack of death chits. The parchment towered like a siege ladder. His pen dug too deep, split, and spilled ink in bruises across the page. He changed tools, reached for the brass stamp engraved, honored in silence, and pressed until the words blurred into the fibers. He worked with the rhythm of a man forging armor in the dark, each impact measured, each seal a blow against his own ribs. Vardath stood nearby, reading nothing, pretending his presence steadied the air. Kyle prayed with his eyes open, as if he feared what might appear when they were shut. Their silence was brittle, a quiet that would snap with any wrong syllable. Outside, the hangar hummed with work. Voices rose and fell. Names shouted for litters. Instructions barked. Litanies muttered by men who no longer believed their own mouths. Someone laughed once. It sounded like a cough with edges. The laugh carried down the corridors and lodged in men's ears like shrapnel. No one admitted to hearing it. By dawn bell, every survivor bore a mark. Some limped, others bled through their bandages. Others carried black smudges on their skin where ink and ash had rubbed into wounds. A few bore stranger scars. Bloodshot eyes that never cleared, lips permanently split, fingers trembling as if stamping their own unseen ledgers. The cost branded them all. The ship itself seemed to mark them, each man altered, each man labeled as paid. Later, long after the last chit was stamped, Serad realized his hand was still moving in the stamping gesture, palm descending, thumb pressing, though no parchment remained. His wrist ached, but he did not stop at once. The ghost of duty continued even when the record ran out. His palm throbbed where the stamp's letters had bitten. Honored in silence. He wanted another phrase, burned into the brass where no one else could read it. Released. He closed his fist until the imprint of the letters dug his skin. Invisible, but undeniable. The stamp's face was slick with ink and blood now, and for an instant, he thought it pulsed in rhythm with the hololith still beating in the strategium beyond. The ship groaned around him. The phantom still paced the hull. The wound remained open, and so did he. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 1, Scene 5, The Cot. Chapter 2, Scene 1 follows.